So, hello to all listeners interested in the topic of gun control. My name is Benjamin Ho, a first year UCLA student who has been researching varying perspectives on gun control over the past couple of weeks. And through my extensive research, I am certain of my position of where I believe gun control fits into the laws of our government. First of all, I just want to address my finalized opinion on this matter. I don't believe in gun rights, but I just want to walk with you guys through my thought process of on why exactly I believe so. This all started about a week ago or a couple weeks ago when I just started on this paper on perspective on why people would advocate for gun rights and just understanding their perspective on why like on opposing perspectives, right? And at first glance, all the points were pretty convincing. I mean, logically and emotionally speaking, the reasoning all made sense. And their points were all well thought out, and I could tell that not all the people who advocated for gun rights had zero reason to believe so. However, even though their reasoning made sense at first, logically and emotionally speaking, upon closer inspection, I found out that these points, they had holes in their argument, which led me to believe my current opinion. I don't believe in gun rights. So before I even get into that, I'm gonna just dive into each point, right, that was said that advocated for gun rights. So one of the many points that people who advocate for gun rights typically say is that having guns in our country actually lowers crimes due to civilian vigilance, which is pretty much when people personally defending is when people personally defend themselves against crimes. So, for example, when they're being robbed or harassed or even abused, since they don't have the time to call the cops or authority, they decide to take things into their own hands in terms of self-defense. And in this case, it's like owning a gun. And they believe that it will lower petty crimes like this from happening. Again, at first, I thought this was a very good point, on why guns should be allowed, especially if data backs this up. But that was exactly where the problem was for me, right? When I kept researching about statistics to prove this, it was very weak and I was very biased. Sure, I was able to scavenge some sources to back it up, but there was way more overwhelming evidence to prove that guns don't lower crime and instead increase it. Not only that, but statistics that prove these claims were often very broad, and methods to obtain these data sets were not very transparent. So, to disregard all this evidence and cherry pick specific evidence instead of looking at the general consensus seemed dishonest to me. And also, emotionally speaking, I felt this argument was very dangerous. So, the way I heard this argument initially was that people who advocate for gun rights thought that in order to combat violence, we need to use violence in response. And for me, the way that maybe I grew up and maybe because of even my belief system, from where I stand, I truly believe that fighting fire with fire only breeds more violence, and it just breeds more fire. So why would there's got to be a better way to do that. So yeah, and another thing that really clicked for me was that when I looked at other peer-reviewed research, there was clear evidence that pointed toward the fact that higher gun availability tends to correlate with higher rates of gun violence, right? So, for example, in the American Journal of Public Health, they say that a 1% increase in gun ownership is correlated with the homicide rate also increasing by about 1%. So, I mean, of course, this statistic doesn't really prove everyone, right, who has guns. It doesn't say that, oh, every single gun owner commits crimes, but it does definitely go to show that at a population level, on a general level, more guns in circulation equals or is generally associated with more gun deaths and more violence. And the same goes for suicide too, which I believe is a factor of gun violence that people don't really take account of, right? And suicide is in fact one of the highest, is the majority of gun deaths in the United States. So the presence of a firearm dramatically increases the likelihood that a suicide attempt will result in death, because guns are incredibly dangerous compared to other methods. And yeah. And another argument I heard a lot was the self-defense against a tyrannical government, right? Not just other people, but the government itself, which was the main reason why this amendment and the Constitution was even created, right? So, a little background information if you do not know. One of the sole reasons, and if not the main reason why the founding fathers implemented this right into our Constitution, is because they didn't want America to be a country like Great Britain, right? The country that colonized America before it became America. And it was kind of built in place. It was kind of implemented into our laws to have guns in order to get rid of any insurrections from occurring, right? And again, I thought this argument was very sound and logical. Historically speaking, it happened before, so how do we prevent it from happening again? Like, this seemed like the obvious solution. However, I mean, obviously, yeah, again, like, obviously, if the government isn't going to help us, like, we should at least have the ability to protect ourselves, right? We should have the freedom to protect ourselves. However, again, the more research I did to see the validity of this point, the more questions it brought. For one, militaries nowadays are so technologically advanced that people having a couple handguns and assault rifles won't stop them. And I think like most people will argue saying that like the founding fathers never imagine guns to be used in this way or like be so advanced nowadays. And it kind of links to the point for me is like if the government wants to attack its citizens like us, especially America being like one of the most strongest militaries in the world, like in the history of the world, like we're just not going to be able to do anything. And contrary to that, I tried finding sources that like prove the other side, right? Stating like, oh, like why do like are there credible sources and events in history that show that like allowing guns to citizens did prevent any tyrannies from occurring? And quick summary, I barely found any. Like it was, if I'm gonna be honest, it was a stretch trying to find a couple for my research paper. And one event was specifically the Hungarian Revolution, which happened during and an event during the Holocaust. But when looking at these historical events, the people that were trying to fight against like some sort of tyranny, they never fully stopped them with the usage of guns. Like, if anything, like the only thing that they did was like delay them from like becoming more of a problem, if that makes sense. And again, that was from 70, 80 years ago. Like that was when military weapons weren't nearly as advanced, weren't nearly as lethal as they are now. So like just imagine what it is going to be now. Like we're just going to be shut down regardless of like what we try to do, whatever guns that we might have to like fight against them. So the argument of us being able to protect ourselves against our government just isn't true because we physically cannot do so. And I also started thinking about international comparisons. So again, another point that people who advocate for gun rights say, and this was specifically clear in when interviewing a friend from Texas that I have named Brian to better understand why people believe in gun rights, was that one of the points that he stated was Mexico. So if you didn't know, Mexico is a country in which they have severe gun restriction policies. However, despite the strict gun control laws, my friend stated that Mexico still remains to be one of the places with the highest rates of gun violence and deaths. Specifically, it's fifth in the world for highest gun violence rates. So I thought this was definitely one of the points that was brought up in the opposing perspective that like made me stump. Like, oh, like if that's true, like that, which it is true. Like if that's true, like what is the point in having more gun restriction policies, right? But again, I took that with a grain of salt and I tried researching more on this fact. And when researching more on this fact, I looked at the evidence that said that I came upon evidence that said 4 out of the 5 countries in the world with the highest gun violences per capita are countries that also allow guns, or are countries that are pretty corrupt or hold very little political power over their civilians. And contrary to that, when looking at countries with the lowest gun violence per capita, one pattern is very common. And that pattern is all of them either have a ban on gun control or extremely strict gun control. So, sure, in the grand scheme of things, Mexico may seem like an outlier when that factor is presented like that. But when you look at the grand scheme of things, um, the lack of context is sort of misleading. So, like, the ineffectiveness of gun control laws in Mexico isn't the reason why it's still a dangerous country today for gun violence. Like, instead, other sources that I found claim that gun violence rates are still so high in countries like Mexico because of outside countries that do allow guns being smuggled into these countries. For example, what I mean by this is countries that allow guns, such as the United States, they have people that smuggle the guns across the border so that the implementation of the gun restriction laws in Mexico are pretty much pointless because they're just going to be tunneled or just funneled regardless, right? So that was just definitely a point that I thought was interesting. And look, I think I understand the constitutional argument that many people argue against. Yes, the Second Amendment exists, but rights in America have never been unlimited. For example, free speech, one of our most important laws in America, doesn't mean that you can incite violence. Like, you can't just yell certain things. Like, you can't yell "shooter" in a crowded airport. Like, that's crazy. So the idea that gun ownership must be protected because it's a constitutional right doesn't exactly line up with how we interpret other constitutional rights. Laws evolve based on evidence and public safety. And you may argue that our right of free speech is not completely removed, so we shouldn't completely restrict gun rights. But to that, I have to argue that our freedom of free speech doesn't cause over 100 people per day to die. Gun rights do. So, because there is so much violence or so much death that is involved with this with this right, there should be a huge fundamental change to it to counteract all these lives that are being lost. So yeah, again, that's pretty much all the points that I found on the opposing perspective on why they believe in gun rights. And I hope that from what I explained, that my opinions aren't just from emotion, it's from patterns in homicide rates, patterns in suicide statistics, patterns in peer-reviewed literature. Like, the overwhelming evidence of credible research points in one direction, and it's just intellectually dishonest to ignore all of it because it just conflicts with whatever personal bias I may have. Not that I'm saying I had one in the beginning, but if I were to. So for me, this isn't about demonizing individuals who own guns, who advocate gun rights. It's more so to evaluate what produces the safest outcome for America as a whole. This matter of gun violence means so much to me because this country is not just my home, but the home of my friends, parents, teachers, and ultimately my future, which is the same for all of whom are watching this calling America their home. And to be honest, I'm scared. I'm scared that one day these tragic events of gun violence are going to happen to me or my friends or my family members. Matter of fact, just today, as I'm recording this, I saw a news article saying that 7 people were shot, and 2 of who are fighting for their lives while they were enjoying their regular day-to-day in downtown Oakland. 5 days before that, a person opened fire at a bar in Austin, killing 4 people and injuring more than a dozen people. A week before this incident, 4 people were killed in an ice hockey game in Rhode Island. So yeah, I'm obviously scared that someone I know will be up on the news like this, where they are hurt or worse, killed. And I believe you should too. That's where I stand. Not because it's trendy and because our media are more liberal minded or left, and just my honest, well thought out opinion by following the data as honestly as I could. That's where it led me. So hope you guys enjoyed my yap session. I know it was kind of long, but also hope that you were able to learn something new about gun control debate and able to develop your own position like I did. Thank you.